I'm Gina London, and over the last 2 decades, I've worked as a network journalist and an international campaign strategist to help tens of thousands of business professionals all around the world develop their unique strengths as connecting communicators. The most effective and connecting leaders are not born that way, they work hard at it. What makes an effective leader? It's through learning and developing purposeful communications. What are those components that make someone stand out in a crowd? To be able to encourage and motivate and inspire groups of people wherever they are, it's the components of purposeful communications. In this course, through 8 chapters and a variety of lessons, I will help you hone the necessary skills to help you better connect and effectively lead every time. You'll develop your voice, your body language, and your storytelling abilities to connect with others and yourself better than ever before. So let's get at it right now. Is it possible to change? And the answer is yes, but first you got to want it. And years ago, I was asked by a corporation to work with the managing director, and he did not want to work with me. And when I first walked into his office, the door had been open, and he stayed behind his desk as I approached, and he stood up behind his desk, reached his hand across, and said, "I'm not happy to meet you. You already can see that I have an open door policy because you walked right through it." And I said, "Yeah, but how many times have you walked out to meet your team and engage with them and be personable?" Because, see, his 360s had come back and it had said that he's not a personable guy. And he said, "Well, okay, you're right. I've never done that sort of thing." So, first, you have to understand that you can change. And then, most important of all, you have to understand that if you embrace that change, you're going to be even more capable of changing. And changing doesn't mean not being who you still are, it means evolving. And a lot of that comes from some of the work from the 1970s from a renowned psychologist named Carol Dweck. She's still a professor emeritus at the University of the UCLA in California. And she talks a lot about this whole concept of growth mindset, like an athlete with a coach who can develop his or her abilities to run or to swim or to row. We also, with a growth mindset, can embrace that we can change our very characteristics. The very idea of this managing director taking the initiative and going out on his floor and asking his employees how their weekend was or what's going on with their family was new to him. And even if we're still in a virtual environment, working from home, or whether or not we're back in offices, the way that we take initiative to communicate and learn about how we communicate and begin to develop those skills, that's the nature of the growth mindset. So for right now, today, where you are, think about yourself as that person. Are you someone who identifies yourself as a personable, connecting leader? Or are you someone who says, "I've got it already all figured out"? Probably not, or you wouldn't be taking this course. I like to do a quiz with a lot of people in leadership positions or wherever you are in your career right now to think about yourself more as a leader. So, is a leader someone who has a big team, a lot of employees around them, part of a big multinational corporation? Or B, would a leader be someone who may have a direct small team? Or C, is a leader someone who interacts even with just one person? Or D, is it all of the above? Well, of course, you know the answer. It's all of the above. Any one of us who interacts with people, we have impact and influence over that person, and that makes us a leader, and we can take ownership and enthusiasm about that. And if you embrace the growth mindset that you can develop yourself, that you can take more control over things that you might not have known you had control of, you too can become like my managing director ultimately became, more personable, more purposeful, more intentional about how you interact and how you care and how you value each other. And that is the crux of growth leadership. And that is the beginning and the foundation of embracing and developing yourself as that personable leader I know you want to be. Let's dig deep right now and think about yourself, where you are at this moment. We've decided that you are a leader. If you interact with another person, then therefore you are somewhat of influence, somewhat of impact, and a leader. Now, I often ask my clients to identify, though, what are the characteristics of a leader. We talked about Carol Dweck and the idea of growth mindset, how you can develop your personal traits and characteristics, just like any type of physical ability as an athlete. So first we have to decide, what are those characteristics? What are those traits? Well, often when I talk to my clients and give them this chance to make a top of the mind survey, they'll say things like, well, integrity, trust, showing value, being honest, being direct. And all of those are very important aspects of a purposeful leader. And important for you now to identify, what would you say are your top three? If you can, write those down. And finally, I want you to think about this, often described as the top desirable characteristic of a leader from my clients and from others that are surveyed. This word is often used, maybe even overused at this point, and that's why I want to bring this to the attention right now. I want you to consider this very word. Ready? Authenticity. What do you think about this word? A lot of times people say that, oh, we need to be an authentic leader. I want to be my authentic self. I want to be authentic. Authenticity is important, but go to the next lesson. And I want to put a little bit of spin on that to be a bit provocative and make us think and go even deeper. Authenticity. What does it mean? Why do we love it? Why do we also want to be cautious about hiding behind it as a means to stop or limit our growth or our evolution or our development as a leader? Here's what I think. Authenticity on the whole, well, if you've got a little child or you run across a toddler at some point, they're probably going to have a tantrum. That is that little toddler's authentic self, isn't it? And sometimes if you've had a fight with a spouse or a partner or significant other or a neighbor, and you're coming into the office or you're going to turn on a Zoom room and you're really frustrated, and that frustration comes through because it's authentic to you, it's not setting the weather for your team. You as a leader, you as a human being, have a responsibility to bring your authentic self, yes, when it's appropriate to show value and to encourage your audience or your team. But if you're in a really bad mood and you toss your keys on the desk and you go breezing by all of your team members, you've just set the weather in a way that is not uplifting. You're not creating culture. To be a leader is to understand how to purposefully take those identified characteristics inside you and externally demonstrate them with purpose every time appropriate to your audience. That's the power and the cautionary tale of being authentic. Once you think about your characteristics and how to connect your internal identified characteristics completely purposefully so that you can be authentic but also intentional. This is part and parcel of this whole notion known as executive presence. And oftentimes people say, well, I know it when I see it, but I don't know how to develop it or own it or exude it for myself. And that is part of becoming a purposeful communicator, is to start to unpack the elements of executive presence into components so that you can rebuild yourself in a way of purpose. Becoming a purposeful and intentional communicator is developing and layering on characteristics in a way so that you can take more ownership and control of the who you are, how you behave, how you exude executive presence. When you walk into a room, you'll be looking at the other people first. They'll be seeing that you're interested in them. You'll be setting the room again, setting that weather, that temperature in the room at ease. Your poise, your confidence, your comfortableness in a situation will then set other people at ease. And that's the goal for executive presence in today's modern, caring, needing to connect society. It's not the old command and control style where you demanded respect. The layers of leadership now are focusing more on how do you earn respect? How do you train and coach and encourage others? How do you show value purposefully? That's the way to be someone who's known as having caring and compassionate executive presence. We're going to tell you how to do that, begin to layer on more strategies for you coming up next in the next chapter. Before we begin layering on those characteristics to help you become that purposeful leader and communicator with real care and compassion and exude that executive presence I know you're capable of, take a moment and download the PDF that we've provided for you so that you can begin to get real honest and real and real authentic about the kind of leader that you are today. Take a look and go through and think about the behaviors that you apply right now. Think about the way you do or you don't think about your communications, and come back with me. And we're going to start diving right in to layer on more effectiveness, more care, and more compassion. Think about this for a moment. Our lives are really nothing more than a series of feedback loops. We are never not communicating, and we are either communicating by design or by default. And largely, it's right now by default, I would put out there for all of us, most of us anyway. And what happens is to understand that our communications don't land in a vacuum, that we are never not communicating. We are communicating even if we don't say a word, aren't we? And when we think about our communications, it's an opportunity to not get overwhelmed, but an opportunity to think about, well, then how can we identify the components of how we communicate? And how can we then take ownership one component at a time to become more purposeful, more aware, more by design of how we communicate? Because our communications, face it, they are not, as I said, in a vacuum. They're not neutral. They're either moving your relationship closer and further along, or they're possibly doing damage that you have to go and repair later. So if you think about the high stakes that any communication event has around with it, it gives us that call to action that we can take more control over even the smallest things. And that's the power of taking control over those feedback loops, of starting to build them by design so we can get better responses, which in turn reinforce our new behaviors, which then get more positive responses, which then reinforces those behaviors. And look what we've just done. We've created a whole new series of positive feedback loops. And really, one positive feedback loop at a time makes up our lives and the lives of others. So when we stop and think about how we can begin to regain control over our thoughts and behaviors to modify our characteristics and develop ourselves as purposeful leaders, the first thing I'd like you to think about then is, what can you control? The answer is almost everything. It takes time and it takes practice. But imagine that your brain, all those thought patterns right now, like a bunch of snow with tracks in it from sleds going in all different directions. And the way that we're behaving right now has largely been reinforced by that continual behavior. But neuroscientists and brain surgeons will teach you that if you purposely do something differently or you disrupt that brain pattern, it's like the little sled is learning to go in a different direction on that hill of snow. So, thinking about intentionally disrupting behaviors is the first step to taking more control over the way that you currently communicate and are perceived as a leader. And make no mistake, as we've talked about identifying the characteristics that you want to exude, it's important that you don't rely back on, well, people just need to get to know me. People don't often have time to get to know the real you. The person that you put forward is who you are. That's who you're perceived to be. So the more you can take control over how you project, how you exude, how you behave, you are then taking control over the you that is being presented. And that is a real critical component of understanding how you can modify, take control of your characteristics to become the leader that you want to be. I'm a big fan of the power of 3, pretty much because I can only remember 3 things. Give me 4 or 5 and I'm gonna forget them. So, I try to make my lessons in series of 3s. And the first way that we can think about how do we communicate, what are those areas that we can control to retrain our patterns in our brain? I break them down to 3 letters, A, B, C: appearance, behavior, and communications. First, let's tackle appearance. Now, I am certainly not one who says that this is how it should be. But unfortunately, this is how it is in our very not perfect world. Neuroscience will tell you that in the time that it takes from our eyes to see you and move up to our brain, it's about a nanosecond. And that's about the amount of time it takes for someone to make a judgment. Now, that judgment isn't one that stays with the other person, but we are assessing people based on the signals that we're receiving from each other on our physicality, on our appearance, on the clothing that we choose, on the hairstyle that we choose, on the makeup that we choose or we don't choose. All of these things are important to bear in mind, not because we all need to fit some Vogue model ideal. No, but because we want to take ownership over the areas that we choose to for the reasons that we choose to. Now, when I work with my clients, we'll go through a series of photos that they feel comfortable, relaxed, really empowered in. Here's their favorite outfits, here's their favorite accessories, even down to their shoes. Here's their hairstyle that they wear in a formal setting, in an informal setting. And all of these things that we go through are to not make judgment calls on the one perfect ideal, but to have me understand with them that they've made the choice, remember this word, deliberately, by design, with rationale based behind it. For example, someone who's the curator of an art museum might have really funky long earrings. Someone who's working in a bank and is looking for a promotion might own those same funky pair of earrings, but choose not to wear them when they're going through their promotional interview. Choices are the power of appearance for us largely. To think and understand that we are being judged by our appearance. Are we going for an interview? Are we looking polished? Are we looking sharp? What's the culture of that place that we're interviewing for? The idea around appearance is often just one step around or better than that culture if you can understand it, if you're in an interviewing situation. Because what we're trying to do is understand that we signal the way that people will perceive us by the choices that we make around our apparel, around our hairstyles, around our accessories. And that's not that you can't be funky, but take ownership over the way that you are perceived. And the idea here then is once you make a choice and defend that choice, stand by that choice. Also, know that over time, those choices might change, and that's okay too. When I work with clients around appearance, this is one of those touchy areas, but it's also an area where you can feel great empowerment around it. And you can also feel that because we are a multifaceted people, depending on the audience that you're going to be interacting with, you might change one facet of the you that you're bringing. Again, not to be disingenuous or to be manufactured or manipulative, but because you're wanting to better connect by being a mirror or reflection of that person. Appearance. There's a lot to unpack in this, but the more that you begin to take ownership and consciously make choices that bring the best of you to show value to others in a way that connects, I know that you're going to feel more confident, more comfortable, and begin to really exude that executive presence. I can't hear you because your behavior is in the way. Think about that line seriously for just a second. Remember, if your parents ever said to you, do as I say, not as I do, that of course it doesn't resonate with us, does it? Because we are constantly looking at the actions of others. And our behavior is something that we can take ownership of and change. It's not easy because our reactions are often connected to external triggers. And the more that we start to identify what those triggers may be, write them down. What sets you off? What builds your adrenaline? If you have a journal and you can dedicate a notebook to begin to track things that you see lead to a reactive behavior with a negative result, this is the first step toward modifying those behaviors, finding solutions for a behavior. Simple things like block breathing can go a long way to adjusting a behavior. What's block breathing? It's the simple notion of breathing in for 4 seconds and breathing out for 4 seconds. And what we're trying to do here in behavior modification, when we think about taking the ownership of our behavior, well, that's just who I am. Remember, no, that's who you were. This is who you're becoming. Your change in even a simple block breathing interaction can go from reaction to response. How do you respond to something that is different than how you might instinctively want to react? That is, again, the notion of becoming a purposeful communicator, is taking ownership for the who you have been and taking more enthusiasm about the person and the leader that you can become. Your behavior, as you modify it, won't be evident to people right away because they'll still be perceiving you in that first feedback loop. But to move to an effective second feedback loop takes about 3 to 6 months of a modified behavior consistently performed over time to that same audience. So give yourself some time, but make sure and dedicate yourself to practice around modifying identified behaviors from reaction to response. Okay, we've talked about appearance and behavior. Here's our letter C, communications. Now, of course, our appearance and our behavior are also ways that we're communicating, aren't they? But this notion of the C, of the communications facet, is really important because this is where we are often still in that talking by default and not by design. Years ago, hundreds of years ago, in fact, Leonardo da Vinci wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, that man largely sees without observing. He speaks without conversing. He hears without listening. And becoming a purposeful communicator means that you're going to take real, deliberate control over how you communicate. And again, my power of three comes into play here because I like to break communications down into these three very important components: our words, the paralingual, and our delivery around body language. Words, paralingual, and body language. These interlocking simultaneous components are the way that we communicate all the time that start those feedback loops going. And once we begin to break those components down and look at them, we can rebuild them in a way to better connect with others and ourselves. These three interlocking components of appearance, behavior, and communications are just as important in a virtual setting as in person. In fact, I've even conducted entire workshops around how to conduct yourself in a broadcast world now that we're all broadcasters. But let me give you some highlights. First and foremost, your appearance does matter in a Zoom or whatever platform you're on. I know many of us have been working in pajama bottoms and in tops on only on the top. But the more that you can feel sharp, research shows, and polished, even in a virtual setting, the more then you will exude that. So take that on board. Try to skill up a little bit for your next shot. Secondly, behavior. It's tough sometimes in a virtual setting if there's a lot of people on the screen to forget that you're still on camera, even if you're not speaking. And how many times have you looked across on one of those gallery walls or those mosaic walls and seen somebody going like this or leaning back? That's behavior, and that is sending a message. Finally, your communications in a virtual world. It's harder to read people's body language on the screen. And so, looking to see those clues about are they still speaking? Are you looking in the camera? Are you looking at the monitor? How do you look like you're engaging with them? And how are you still showing energy in your voice when you're communicating and not getting into that difficult situation many people get into when they're on a Zoom room meeting, and that is over talking, monologuing, and not giving the other person a chance to feedback or give their opinions as well. So, thinking about how you can take ownership around appearance, behavior, and your communication style in a virtual setting is also very important. Communications is not just about delivering, it's about how you're received. The idea between two and more human beings, how do we become a society? How do we become a community? How are we effective leaders? It's this powerful word of connections. And the trinity of connections, of communications, is structure, strategy, and delivery. And the way that you prepare the strategy component is going to inform the structure component. What words, what imagery, how do you structure based on who that audience is? And then how do you skill up around your delivery? So, why? You're more connecting. The more that you can begin to understand that those three elements strategy, structure, delivery are areas that you can take ownership of, develop, begin to take on for yourself, and become more skilled at. You'll accelerate your ability to apply these different strategies and techniques so that you'll be able to more quickly connect with other people. And the first person you speak to every morning in thoughts or in deeds, it's yourself. We want you to be able to connect not just with others, but also with yourself. And the strategy and the structure and the delivery techniques will help you get there as well. My fundamental foundation for the strategy of connecting boils down to three simple letters: AIM. And yes, it stands for the acronym AIM. How do you take aim? Well, you apply this strategy every single time in any communication event. And make no mistake, the idea of being a purposeful leader is that you're not just saving these characteristics that you're developing for a one off presentation or for a big conference or for an important interview or for speaking to shareholders. You are beginning to take ownership over applying this AIM strategy every single time, whether you're talking to a mechanic or a doctor or a barista or your children or your family. The idea of thinking about AIM is important every single time. So, what does AIM stand for? These three letters: audience, intent, message. These letters in this order every time will be your key to better connections. The first letter in the AIM strategy of connections is A. What does A stand for? It's audience. Who's your audience? It's anyone you're speaking to, anyone you're interacting with, anyone that you are trying to make a connection with, whether or not it's one, two, or many. The important aspect of having your audience in that first position of strategy is because you are spending some time thinking about who they are. Now, this is not just demographics, although that's also important. You can think about, how do they identify themselves? Are they young? Are they more experienced? Are they starting off in a company if I'm speaking to a team? Are they a group of new recruits that I want to bring into my organization? Wherever you are, if it's someone that you're interviewing with, the more that you can understand the pictures in the person's head, that's the critical component about understanding an audience. Before I was working on with CNN, I actually had a trainer say this to me. No matter how dry the story, someone out there who's listening, it is hitting part of a hope or a dream or of a fear of that person. So I share now with my clients, think about the audience's hopes, dreams, and fears. Don't prey on their fears, assuage or reassure them around their fears. Think about what their hopes and their aspirations are and use that to guide what your agenda for speaking is going to be about. Sometimes I work with my executive clients and I say, write down your agenda, all the things that you like to cover, put it on a piece of paper. And now write the agenda as you might imagine it from the hopes, dreams, and fears of your audience. And now tear up that first piece of paper and look down at your piece of paper for the audience and go with that agenda. Your audience should drive your communications every time. That's why the A is in that first position. The second letter in AIM, of course, is I. After you've thought about your audience, the I stands for intent. Now, the important thing to remember here is the I does not stand for inform. It's not enough to simply say the information is going to be inferred and understood by my audience. It's first really important to understand what's my goal? What's the action I want them to take? For example, this is really important when you're dealing with a lot of people speaking at a particular event. I was once working with a senior leadership team of a large multinational organization, and we were sitting all around the table, and they were going to roll out a new HR policy throughout the organization. And I said to each of the 5 leaders around that table, what's the intent for this particular presentation? And I'm not kidding you, each one of those women, in fact, around that table had a different variation on the goal or the intent of that policy presentation. And imagine if they hadn't had a chance to unify and get cohesive around that intent, how disjointed they would have been if they were presenting. And just that simple moment of getting organized and clarity around, hey, what do we really want our audience to do? Do we want them not just to understand, but what do we want them to do next? Once we unified around that, then they said they can be much more cohesive and reinforcing of each other. So when you identify yourself, what's the intent? Often narrowly defined, not some broad, well, I want them to achieve everything. Your first intent for any particular meeting might just be to even get the second meeting or to get an introduction or understanding. The more defined you can be about your intent, the more specific you can be then in crafting your message. You've thought about your audience. What are their hopes, dreams, and fears? You've narrowly defined your intent. Now is the important part, crafting a message. Too often I've had clients say, oh, they'll understand. They know the theme of what it is I'm trying to convey. No, your message by definition should be a statement, simple, memorable, data backed, emotional, and easy to be repeated. If your audience doesn't know exactly what you want them to understand, how then can they go act upon it in a positive way? So, one thing I ask my clients to do, and I'm asking you to do right now, is take a moment, make a hypothetical situation or something that you're going to be speaking on coming up in the future. Write down that audience, write down the intent, and then craft a message, usually in about 12 words or fewer. And then the most important thing of all, once you've written that statement, practice it, speak it out loud, internalize it so that you can communicate it to your audience. I've created a simple cheat sheet for you to apply AIM every time for every communication event. And so I encourage you to download that before our next lesson. A lot of my clients say they've never thought about structuring their communications. They sort of open their mouth and what comes out comes out. And this is where it's an exciting opportunity to begin to think about how you visualize what you say actually as images. So, for example, if you are going to be preparing a presentation, instead of just looking at a blank page, imagine the image of you saying things in blocks or in chunks. The more that you can start to imagine the elements of what you say as puzzle pieces or building blocks that you can then begin to move them around as needed. This is a critical way to start to think about craft for communications as opposed to just running communications with no end in sight. And this is a great tool. In fact, a lot of introverts really find this appealing because they can start to have instructions and methodology to things that they might have been feeling much more that it needed to be something that was innate or that it was something that other people have and they don't. The concept of communications as construct is something that anyone can apply. So once you begin to think about, well, let's break down what that networking event is like. It's here are some questions we can ask. Here's the anticipated answers. Here's the next place I go. And you begin to actually see in yourself, in your mind's eye, a road mapping of that interpersonal dialogue. And that's one element of visualizing communications. So beginning to think about communications is essentially, again, that feedback loop. What's my first position? What's the second position? Where am I taking my audience? What's my response if they come out with a different answer than the one that I've anticipated? Can I anticipate a couple of different variables? The more you get excited about maybe the puzzle or the mapping of communications, that's a fundamental tool to developing communications as structure. One of the top things I get asked to coach executives on from their supervisors or their CEOs is around this notion of being clear and brief, being able to stop and hear yourself pause, being able to lead with a headline and then give a supporting story or anecdote and then wrap. This concept of being clear and brief or having clarity and brevity is an important element of being a leader of purpose or exuding that executive presence that most of us, many of us, so aspire to have and develop. And I'm absolutely certain that once you understand the concept of being clear and brief and the structure that it requires, you too can develop it. Early in journalism school, one of the first things I was taught was this notion of the inverted pyramid. So, again, thinking about visualization for structure of communications. Now, picture an inverted pyramid, a triangle with a point right here, like this. And that's a great way to begin to visualize that structure that's required for clear and brief answers, clear and brief delivery, clear and brief presentation. It's simply this again, visualizing a headline or your message at the top, a supporting example, story, anecdote, conversation, data point in the middle, and then a wrap or conclusion or restatement of the headline at the end. Now, that three-part structure, making that overarching open, small support, wrap at the bottom can help you nail that answer, make that presentation in a concise and a clear way every time. So go ahead and draw that triangle, write that headline in, write that anecdote in, write that repeat, that wrap line at the very bottom. Imagine then, if you can think about that pyramid, how you can apply that. If you've got more time, it's a 20-minute presentation, then you can give a couple more anecdotes, a couple more illustrations. If you have less time, you've got to deliver something in 30 seconds or a minute, then you're going to want to make that truncated. And that's the power of using that visualization tool in an inverted pyramid to be able to structure in a formulaic way at first. You can embroider it over time, but you get that foundation strong and that structure succinct, and it'll help you better connect every time. I'm sure you've heard that adage, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Well, it's true in structuring your answers and presentations and your communications. And that's part of becoming a more consistent communicator is to focus on preparation before even a simple call or a simple interactive meeting with a supervisor or with your direct report or your team. When we layer on AIM strategy and we think about who that audience might be, then we also can anticipate what kinds of questions they might be asking us or what kind of objections they might be raising. And if you do that in advance, it's important to write things down. If you just think about it out in the ether, your thoughts tend to wander and you don't have a definitive, here's an objection, here's a question, here's my response. If you write it down, you actually can visualize it. And then the other component I keep stressing to my clients, don't just look at it, state it out loud. Start to muscle memory it. We're going to do a lot more work in subsequent chapters about delivery and muscle memory of how you can communicate orally. But right now, I want you to think about how you can write potential questions, anticipate those that you might be receiving, write those answers. That preparation is critical when it comes to structure for connecting communications. One of my clients is a senior leadership team member of a large multinational, and he's pretty efficient at communicating and he feels pretty accomplished. He's written a couple of books, but he said, Gina, the hardest thing I have is when I get a question that I wasn't expecting and I didn't prepare for it. What do I do in the moment? I said, power of three. Either park, pivot, or unpack. Park is the first thing you can do when someone asks you a question you weren't expecting. You say, "That's a great question. I really think that's important. I think I'm going to buy myself some time." What you're doing is you're parking with a line, but you're not parking in a way that is indicating to the audience that you don't value the question. You can even use lines that are prepared, like I said, "That's a great question. That's really important. We need to understand that a bit more. Let me go back and get some information for you." Have prepared park lines so that when you're getting a question that puts you off your footing, you can be smooth as you respond. The next one is the pivot. And this one's sneaky, but it's also very effective. If someone asks you a direct question that wasn't agreed upon, that is sabotage, or is really putting you off your footing. Any of these things can happen in various situations in our lives and in our careers. The pivot is to answer in the way that's positive no matter what they asked you. Try it. If there's a real dogged interviewer or someone who's going to come at you and push that question again, then you might have to go into the park mode. But if you can pivot in a poised way with a prepared response of something positive, oftentimes the person will take that as the response and move forward. And finally, unpack. This is also a real powerful tool when you're handling unexpected questions. That's to answer back with a question, to have them unpack their question for greater understanding. It does also buy you some time, by the way. But if you say, "Let me understand better what it is you meant by that. Can you expand on that? Can you break that down for me?" Those types of questions back to the questioner will also sometimes build a little bit of rapport, which is where you really want to get when we're ultimately trying to make connections with whomever we're communicating. So, for handling questions, I urge you to try park, pivot, or unpack. I know each of you can think back to a time in your childhood where you went on a great vacation or you accomplished something that was unexpected, or maybe you won a competition like a race or a spelling bee or a swim meet. And that feeling of accomplishment, that story that you can share, maybe you've been sharing it with your family over the years, but you've never shared it with a team or with your employees or in an interview situation. The idea of becoming a purposeful leader and a purposeful communicator is also understanding the power and the purpose behind storytelling. Like I said, we've all got stories. Sometimes, though, people think, "But my story's not big enough, or I haven't done enough, or I haven't walked on the moon, or I haven't been the captain of a ship." I once had a director of communications, mind you, no lie, tell me I never speak about myself because I don't have any interesting stories. But I want to encourage you right now that your story matters. Hashtag my story matters. You have stories. Sometimes the more simpler, quiet stories are the ones that other people will connect with the most. And that's the power of storytelling, is that it starts to light up more parts of our brain than simple decoding of information. When you link a story to a part of information, that makes that point stick. Write down a couple of memories from your childhood, and we're going to go through then and talk about how to power those up, give them a little more structure so that they can resonate with audiences in any type of setting. If you download the PDF on My Story Matters, it'll give you a little outline to help you get into the zone of understanding how your story matters and how you can begin to construct it. As you know, I'm a big fan of visualization. So imagine right now your story as a star. And the 5 points of that star are the different components of how what I describe as star-studded storytelling. Easy for me to say, right? But if you think about your 5 points of that star and you begin to structure your story with some visualization around each of those components, which we're going to share later, it will help you make that connection and help you craft that story so that you can better connect. The 5 points are scene, friction, outcome, lesson for you, and the most important of all is the lesson or takeaway for the audience. Setting the scene in a dynamic way helps bring your audience immediately to where you were in that story when you're telling it. Now, you don't have to do all of these components, but I want to emphasize with you some of the fun things that you can do in storytelling. That is, for example, the smells, the time of day, the temperature, the season, the emotions you might have been feeling or feeling that others were feeling around you. The more vibrant you can make your scene in the telling, the more that we instantly go there with you. This is because different parts of our brain light up when we are recognizing and connecting with you on those shared images. If you say, I was at the seaside and it could smell the fish, or I was at the seaside and it smelled salty, I could feel the breeze. All of those types of sensory descriptions help us stay with you and help make that opening scene and ultimately that story that much more memorable. So when you are beginning to tell a story, you don't have to create 5 paragraphs about scene if you don't have 5 minutes of time. But if you can use powerful imagery words or vivid word choices, you can still set a scene in a short amount of time as well. The importance here is to remember that your scene is that opening hook to take your audience with you as you tell a story. The second and third points of storytelling are the friction or the obstacle and the outcome. So, the more that you can really definitively explain, here's what you were trying to achieve, here's the obstacle, here's what I was overcoming, here's what I was concerned about. Don't let your audience infer, tell them. And then, after you emotionally explain what was happening, then what happens next is really critical. What was the outcome? Was it an achievement? Was it a disappointment? Either one of them is okay, but again, don't let your audience infer. Oftentimes, when people are constructing story, it's so vivid in their mind, they're forgetting they're not writing for themselves. They're writing for the audience who doesn't know it and isn't familiar with what happened next. So make sure that your friction and your outcome are very clear. The most important thing to keep in mind about storytelling is that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. I moved to Ireland from the United States, and I was often told, we're a nation of storytellers. I said, yes, but the stories have to end. So here's the final 2 points about storytelling when you are trying to connect to a business audience. And that is your lesson that you learned from the scene that you set, the friction that you had to overcome or you didn't overcome, whatever that outcome was. What you learned, that takeaway, is really important. And then the final component is the most important of all because this is the takeaway that has meaning to the audience. If someone's listening to your story, they don't want to just hear what it meant for you. They want to know what's in it for them. Don't forget, every audience at any given time is always tuned to one radio station, WIFM. What's in it for me? You've got to be able to find that connection point about why this story has meaning. But I can guarantee that almost any story in which you learned a lesson, then there's got to be a reason that you can connect it back to some application for others who are listening. What's in it for you? What's the takeaway for them? Those are the final two key components of star studded storytelling. your scene, your friction, the outcome, the lesson for you, and the takeaway, the meaning for your audience. Do that, and I guarantee your points will stick better when you add that kind of storytelling at the end. The three ways that we communicate at any given time are through the word choice, the words that we choose, the paralingual, and our body language. Let's talk about paralingual. First of all, what does it mean? I've never had a client be able to tell me, and I ask this all the time, hey, what does that mean? It's simply vocal variety. It's using your voice as an instrument. And oftentimes people think, well, this is just my voice and I don't have any instrumental quality to it. Of course you do. If you would do this as an example, I'd love for you to read a piece of copy from an employee handbook or from maybe some marketing materials that your company's prepared, or maybe a presentation you're about to give on sales or quarterly reports or projections or something about your organization. Then put that on camera, record that. Then I'd like you to tell a story. Remember how we were talking about storytelling? Tell a story from your childhood. Tell a story about one of your children if you have them. Tell a story about your dog. Just tell a fun story and record that. Now, here's the point. Watch how you deliver, how you use your voice or don't use your voice in the first recording versus how you naturally deliver with enthusiasm or inflection or variety on the second recording. That's the power of understanding what vocal variety is. You've got an instrument. We're going to teach you now how to use it. 93% of all communications is nonverbal. Have you heard that? If I had a dollar for every time I'd heard that, I would be wealthy beyond means. It's not true. It's not as simple as that. I want to debunk the so called Moravian myth because back in the 60s and 70s, there was this fellow named Albert Moravian, and he did an entire series of experiments around communications, but he didn't use full sentences. He used a single word. He used 9 words, in fact, 3 that were positive, like dear, 3 that were neutral, like maybe, and 3 that were negative, like "Mm." Anyway, when he was giving and receiving with between 2 people, they would each person would have the receiver would be listening and the deliverer would have one word. So take the word dear, DEAR. If you say the word dear like this, obviously that person who's receiving is picking up the inflection, vocal variety, and the expression, body language, 2 nonverbal cues on top of the word itself. That's where that misconception that 93% of all communications is nonverbal. But I guarantee if you try to watch a international language film that you're not fluent in without the subtitles and you watch an entire movie with only the inflections in their voices and their expressions, you are not going to understand 93% of that movie. So, yes, words matter as much, not as much, but they matter a great deal as our vocal variety and our body language nonverbal cues. That's debunking the Moravian myth. So let's take your vocal variety to you. Let's understand how you communicate. Remember how I asked you to do that recording of your personal anecdote of a childhood memory or of something that is natural and fun for you to remember? Listen to that recording and get a feel for your natural rhythm. Often we leave that natural rhythm behind when we're trying to be more business and professional. But in today's transparent, connectivity, compassionate leadership desired world, we want to bring that back. We want to be more conversational. And so understanding how you converse is really important. Your baseline range when you read a piece of business copy should be really reflective to how you converse if you're reading from your favorite magazine or from something that an interaction where you're just talking. So do a recording and get that baseline and understand where you speak. Are you quick? Are you slow and deliberate? Do you mumble your words? Do you pronounce your words? Each of those areas, the more you identify them, we can begin to then build and layer on skills on top of them. Once you begin to be more aware of how you speak, for example, pace, are you a natural, real rapid speaker? How can you practice slowing down? We're going to do an exercise on that right now. Take, for example, one piece of copy. I can't wait to go to work. Now, on the face of it, we can deliver it in a variety of ways, can't we? That baseline might be, I can't wait to go to work. But now let's layer on a whole lot of sarcasm, a whole lot of really negative qualities to this. And then you might attack this piece of copy this way. I can't wait to go to work. What happened there? I slowed my pace. I emphasized can't wait. I moved the word wait into a couple of different pitches, even just to give that extra emphasis. And that I really was crisp on my consonants. The more you understand that looking at one piece of copy can be attacked and approached in a different way for a different outcome, it's not to make you feel, oh my gosh, now I'm going to overthink every piece of copy that I ever come across or anything that I write, but it's giving you an opportunity to play. Imagine how a conductor of an orchestra can look at a measure of composition and begin to emphasize the woodwinds or the strings, how to really bring that piece alive. That's the same thing you can do. Play with it, have fun, explore your range. Maybe you want to say, I can't wait to go to work. And that's an enthusiasm approach, isn't it? So the attack there is, I can't wait. Hear the inflection and the pitch goes up. I can't wait to go to work. And then another thing happens is I don't emphasize the consonants in that particular approach. I'm emphasizing the roundness of the vowels. I can't wait to go to work. And there you're really connecting with the higher happy enthusiasm than that crisp sound. I can't wait to go to work. And my lips are smaller and pursed. Beginning to understand and be flexible and fluid with how you speak can really find ways to better connect with audiences. I'm convinced that we are all experts in reading body language, but why aren't we then taking as much ownership and control about how we deliver it? You know, when we're not speaking, people can still see us. And I had a client one time who had her 360s come back, and she was really defensive that it said that she looked sometimes in meetings like she was checked out or that she didn't care. And she said, I'm never like that. I'm really interested. And then I said, well, let me go to a series of all hands meetings. And I did. And she wasn't even aware that when another senior leadership team member was speaking and she wasn't, and there were people all around, she wasn't on the hot seat, she thought. So she sat with her arms folded, scrunched back in her chair, sort of chin down, looking at other places, and she was sending off this message of disinterest or possibly animosity, but she was completely unaware that her body was sending a message. And this is the power of, again, becoming a purposeful communicator, is taking responsibility for all the myriad ways that we communicate at any given time. And our body language is a critical component of how we are connecting or not connecting with other people. So, in this chapter, I'm going to give you some very specific tools and tips and techniques for how you can take ownership and purposefully demonstrate through your body that you care and value your audience. Oftentimes, in my in person or virtual workshops, I will ask my clients to stop immediately, don't move a muscle, and take a look at each other, either through the screens like this or around the room like this, and tell me what the body language of the other people is sending to you. Whether or not you're sitting or standing, your body language posture is already sending a message. For example, as I'm sitting before you right now, I am towards the middle of my chair. I'm not leaning back against the back. I'm leaning about 30 degrees forward to show interest and energy and enthusiasm. If I were that much closer, it would look like I wanted to jump up and leave the room, so I don't go too close. If I'm this farther back, it's starting to look like I'm disinterested or I'm a little more informal or a little more relaxed and not quite as engaged. Your standing posture, same thing. The more that you can stand and lean just slightly in toward the person to whom you're speaking. Don't interrupt that interpersonal space, but give your strength and your core some energy. Pull in that core, pull in those muscles as you're sitting or standing. Not only does it send a signal of focus and energy to your audience, but here's what's really important. If you're starting to lose interest or you're starting to lose a little bit of focus, it can happen. Strengthen that core and you give yourself that energy in your posture, it's going to indicate and remind yourself to stay in focus as well. So your posture sends a great message to others and yourself. What do you do with your hands when you speak? Well, you don't just leave them at your sides, don't put them in your pockets. What you do with your hands demonstrates, again, care and enthusiasm and connection to your audience. If you can, your gestures, if you're in a screen, should be in the camera range. If you're gesturing down below the shot, nobody can benefit from that. If you understand how the shot is framed, then you can gesture more openly. An open gesture shows and indicates more care and compassion. This kind of forceful gesture is more authoritarian. That's the old style of leadership, and it's not the kind of leadership, purposeful, caring, and compassion, and value based leadership that we're trying to learn here today. Hands like this, not hands like this, or any of those other gestures that we know we don't want you to show. The idea, though, is again that you're taking purposeful ownership over how you use your hands, how you gesture in a way that shows your audience that you're meaning and really caring about what you're talking about at any given time. One of my favorite CEO clients came to me because he wanted me to help him with a presentation before all of his employees. And I put him on camera as he was delivering his introduction, really flat, without any expression on his face. The delivery was flat, the expression was flat. I said, "Why did you spend so much time writing these lovely, emotional, motivational words if the rest of you looks like you'd rather be anywhere else but where you are right now?" He said, "Well, I don't like all this happy, clappy stuff." I said, "Okay, just go with me for a second. I'm going to put you on camera again, and I want you to read or give your introduction again, but give the biggest razzle dazzle smile you can possibly imagine. And he, you're going to feel like your face is going to crack." So he did. I put him on camera. We replayed it. Now, he thought he was emoting a smile. And I'm telling you, it was just barely over the Mona Lisa. But he looked at that and said, "Oh, I get it now. This one looks really much more pleasant, much more much more engaging. In fact, I could probably even do it more. Yes, your expression says a lot about where people think you want to be. If you don't look passionate or excited about what you're delivering, then how the heck is your audience supposed to feel passionate or enthusiastic about the words you're delivering? And this is, again, not about being fake, but it's about purposefully putting on layers of ways that we connect and communicate so that you can be perceived and received by your audience in a better way. That's what it's all about. Please believe me, your smile and your eyebrows and your entire facial expression connected can indicate much more care than if you are just reading in a stoic way. No matter what the words say, we've got to layer on the expression, the posture, and the gestures to make that whole component of body language connect. Now, to put all of those pieces together about body language, our expression, our gestures, and our posture, it's important to know that not one in of itself is going to necessarily send an entire signal. For example, years ago, I had a newspaper column, and the picture on the column had my arms crossed and my legs were actually crossed standing. I was standing with my legs sort of crossed, and a well-meaning friend of mine wrote to me and said, "Well, all those legs and arms crossed, so you look very closed. It's a very angry body language position." I said, "Now hold on. We read body language in clusters, context, and congruence." And what that means is the cluster, all taken together, my arms might be crossed, but if I'm smiling really broadly, maybe I'm just cold. If I'm making a choice, though, I'm just meeting someone for the first time, I'm probably going to make a real decision to not cross my arms. If I'm in a photograph, then I can't help myself for that particular photo. A lot of times, if a so-called expert says, "I'm going to decipher this entire person's life based on this one snapshot," well, that's not providing for real context or real cluster consistency or congruency now, is it? We are designed to look at things all inclusively. And so we'll be taking some signals more than others. That's why we want to make sure we bring a broader smile if we can, gestures that are open and warm and welcoming, posture that says that we're interested, because we're hoping that those are the ones that will carry the day. But it's also important to know that as people get to know us over time, remember that consistency of behavior we talked about in a previous chapter. The idea that we are reading body language in concert with everything else that's going on is important to keep in mind as well. While you're skilling up one body behavior at a time, don't worry if you're not focusing as much on the others. That's normal. There's a lot of things to take on board in a lesson like this. It's important to try to layer incrementally. So maybe for a week, just focus on your posture. Then the next week, focus on layering on open gestures. And then the following week, really focus on taking ownership over that resting face you might have and how you can lift it and make it a bit more pleasant. So again, take ownership, get enthusiastic about the myriad of ways that you communicate through your body, through your expressions, your gestures, and your posture, all together in a consistent cluster over time. Thinking about all the elements of communications can become overwhelming if taken all at once. That's why we break it down. That's where we talk about structure, the strategy, and the delivery. So, for strategy, aim every time. There's no such thing as a high stakes event and an everyday event. Every communication situation, interaction is an event. So use it as an opportunity to apply aim. Think about your audience, your intent, your message every time. And it's going to be able then to accelerate your ability to apply it in an effective way to better connect. For me, the fundamental foundation of becoming a purposeful communicator is understanding and applying the power of aim. Audience, intent, message. In that order every time. Think about your audience first before you go for a one on one. Think about your audience first if you're preparing for a large presentation or a conference or a meeting. Think about then your intent. What is it you want that audience to do? Not just think, but to do immediately after you've done speaking. Think about the audience then. What will connect with them in that third position of the message? How can you craft a powerful, connecting, uplifting message to get them motivated to take the action that you want them to take? Applying aim, even when you think it's a simple interaction with yourself and a barista, can make the difference between someone saying, "Oh, here's your coffee," and someone saying, "Here's your coffee. Have a great day." The hardest thing about becoming a purposeful communicator is to understand that consistency is key. And also to give yourself a little bit of leeway that if you don't remember to apply aim or remember to turn on your body language, to remember to use your voice as an instrument, one day that's not the end of it. It's just like if you're on a diet and you fall off the wagon one day, get back on it. Just refresh every day. Remind yourself that you are a work in progress and it's okay. None of us arrived on this planet fully formed. To think about yourself as a lifelong learner gives yourself then that encouragement to continue to go on, even if you stumble. The important thing is just try to remember to be consistent as much as you can, and also to give yourself a lot of self care and encouragement along the way. To help you along your way as you're developing yourself, I encourage you to enlist the help of a professional coach. Coaches are not just a luxury item for the C suite, although many CEOs do benefit from coaching because they're often feeling very alone in an area where their senior leadership team could be one that's only giving them what they want to hear, and the value neutral perspective from a coach can really be helpful for them. A coach is valuable no matter where you are on your career journey. If you're an athlete, you don't wait till you're about to turn pro before you enlist a coach, do you? No, you get one every step of the way. A coach can help encourage you to go and see yourself of what you're capable of, sometimes when you cannot. And to be able to have a coach that can help guide you and give a little bit of instruction and encouragement is absolutely invaluable for any person at any time. There are a variety of sources where you can begin to search for that perfect coach. First, if you're in an organization, I encourage you to ask your learning and development department or your HR department. They should have some resources available for you internally and externally. Also, if you're in a networking organization, ask them. I'm sure there's a lot of coaches that are affiliated with your networking organization. Likewise, in the online networking and association of LinkedIn, there are certainly groups that are dedicated to professional coaching around the world. And finally, if you're interested in contacting me, that'd be wonderful as well. To recap, mastering your communications as a leader is an endeavor. There's no doubt about it. It's not something that comes naturally to someone and can't come to you. It is developed and trained and practiced over time. And the more that you can begin to understand that it is those interworking feedback loops that you can take control of holistically, the more that you can begin to break down those feed loops into the little elements and build them back up again. So think about yourself as the composite of all of those elements that we've been discussing over these last chapters and get excited about the opportunity to grow, evolve, change, and develop yourself to become that leader that you can become to better connect with others and yourself. No matter what part of the world you live in or what sector you might be working in, no matter where you are in your employment journey, communications, I am convinced, is the key to everything. It's how we sell ourselves. It's how we envision ideas. It's how we share those ideas. It is how we connect with every other human being on this planet. And the only way that I can see that we can better connect is to get purposeful about understanding, taking control and responsibility over all of those components, and then skilling them up to purposefully connect through the variety of ways that we do communicate with other people every day along our way. I hope that this has been an empowering, an encouraging, and an enlightening series for you. In time and with out loud dedicated practice, hopefully with a coach, I am convinced that each of you can become the leader that you want to be to purposefully connect each and every time with each other and yourselves.